Kids are being harmed, yet she is worried about the backlash that she is going to face for speaking out to protect them. Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. If you are new here, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you're returning, welcome back. Also make sure that you're subscribed. As I've said before, I've noticed that I've had a lot more viewership lately, but not as many people subscribing. So I would love it. I would so truly appreciate it if you would hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. These are just really easy ways to support my channel and hopefully help me to reach more people that value logic, reason, and sanity. I'm not going to go into my entire intro today. Y'all know who I am, and we're just going to talk about something that I truly believe it needs to get more exposure, and I'm really sad about the fact that this has not been talked about more. So we're going to get into it, and I really think that this is a story that everybody needs to know about right now. On this topic of this transgender movement that, as we've said before, is literally taking over everything. It is everywhere. Our kids are just being exposed to it at every corner. Thankfully, we are seeing so many brave voices of people that have gone through the transition process in some form or another and coming out with their stories and speaking up and letting us know that what we are saying and that our concerns about how this movement operates are valid, and they are hoping that their experiences help others avoid this path, that other young people that are being pulled into the idea that they were born in the wrong body, or that every issue that they're experiencing in their life as a young person is because they are being acknowledged as the wrong sex, and that if they change their sex, if they change their name, their pronouns, their appearance, and even go on puberty blockers or hormones, or even move further down the path into medical transition, in some form or other, that these are going to be the answers to their problem. The more experiences that we hear, we have got people, like I said, they're detrans and coming forth with their stories, and also we have people coming from clinics that are actually on the medical side of it, coming out and finally saying, what is happening to kids is not right. What we are doing here is not honest, and what we are doing here is actually really devastating, because we are being sold this idea that kids are coming to these conclusions about their identity on their own, that their depression and anxiety or anything else that they're going through in their life is because they are not being affirmed in the gender that would make them most comfortable, and that if they did make all of these changes, then all of these other things would just go away, that their depression and anxiety would ease, and that they would just feel better about themselves. And what we are seeing is that the opposite is happening, that kids are just, having all of these things that need to be addressed are being completely ignored, and that these activists, teachers, and doctors and counselors are so much more concerned with furthering this movement and, affirming and confirming and receiving praise for their own activism than they are for the well-being of kids. And like I said, I am really, really disappointed that this story has not gotten more attention, but honestly, not surprised at all. So this did come out about 3 weeks ago, and I wanted to bring attention to it once again so that we could keep the conversation going and keep these stories at the forefront of our mind, and not let them go away. So this former clinic worker, Jamie Reed, she came out on February 9th as a whistleblower and said in this article to the Free Press, which I believe is Barry Weiss's publication, the headline for this article says, "I thought I was saving trans kids, now I'm blowing the whistle." And the little subheading says, "There are more than 100 pediatric gender clinics across the US. I worked at one. What's happening to children is morally and medically appalling." So she starts out this article just by saying that she is a 42-year-old queer woman, and she is politically to the left of Bernie Sanders. So first off, it just completely blows apart this narrative that the only people that are against transitioning children, that are against socially and medically, impairing the mental and physical development of children are conservatives, and it stems from a place of hate for the LGBTQ community. When really, honestly, I truly believe, despite what it seems like, because the loudest voices are generally the only ones that we hear, I honestly still believe that this idea of harming children and that their development and what we do as far as keeping them safe is not a political position to most people, and it's something that we are still unified on, that we can still come together on and say, we need to protect kids, that there are things that they are just not mature enough to understand or to make decisions about. And so clearly, this person is politically to the left of Bernie Sanders. I am a very conservative person, yet this is something that we agree on. And just as a bit of background on this person, she said that she has done a lot of counseling with children in foster care and sexual minorities. She worked at the Washington University School of Medicine Division of Infectious Diseases with teens and young adults who are HIV positive. Many were trans or otherwise gender nonconforming. And she said she could relate because these are things that she struggled with as a teen, what her sexuality was, where she identified on the gender spectrum. And she's now married to a trans man, which is a biological woman, raising, 2 kids, and, they have their little family. But it just, it shows to me that she came from a place of just wanting to help kids that have perhaps the same struggles that she faced as a kid. And I think that, going into this gender clinic, that was the idea of the help that she wanted to provide, that she thought she would be going into this environment and be able to provide a safe space for kids who do have these questions to be able to safely explore their identity and determine for themselves who it is that they want to be. The center's working assumption was that the earlier you treat kids with gender dysphoria, the more anguish you can prevent later on. This premise was shared by the center's doctors and therapists. Given their expertise, I assumed that abundant evidence backed this consensus. During the 4 years I worked at the clinic as a case manager, I was responsible for patient intake and oversight. Around 1,000 distressed young people came through our doors. The majority of them received hormone prescriptions that can have life-altering consequences, including sterility. I left the clinic in November of last year because I could no longer participate in what was happening there. By the time I departed, I was certain that the way the American medical system is treating these patients is the opposite of the premise we make to do no harm. Instead, we are permanently harming the vulnerable patients in our care. Like I just said, she was under the assumption that the way that they were conducting care was based on evidence, it was based on science, and that the methods that they were using was truly in the best interest of their patients, and that they were really just trying to help these kids. At least that was what she went in with the understanding of. She says, "Today I'm speaking out. I am doing so knowing how toxic the public conversation is around this highly contentious issue and the ways that my testimony might be misused. I am doing so knowing that I'm putting myself at serious personal and professional risk." This absolutely just blows my mind that she is speaking out. She has seen the horrendous and heinous and evil things that are happening in these clinics to young teens, and she is speaking out knowing that this is a risk to her, that she is going to be targeted and threatened. And I have to wonder, how is that even possible? She's coming forward and saying kids are being harmed, yet she is worried about the backlash that she is going to face for speaking out to protect them, to keep them from being harmed. Like, how does this make sense to anyone? Almost everyone in my life advised me to keep my head down, but I cannot in good conscience do so, because what is happening to scores of children is far more important than my comfort, and what is happening to them is morally and medically appalling. So then she gets into more of the conduct of the center, which I really think is important to talk about. So let's read further into the article. "Soon after my arrival at the transgender center, I was struck by the lack of formal protocols for treatment. The center's physician co-directors were essentially the sole authority. At first, the patient population was tipped toward what used to be the traditional instance of a child with gender dysphoria, a boy often quite young who wanted to be a girl. Until 2015 or so, a very small number of these boys comprised the population of pediatric gender dysphoria cases. Then, across the Western world, there began to be a dramatic increase in a new population. Teenage girls, many with no previous history of gender distress, suddenly declared they were transgender and demanded immediate treatment with testosterone." So if you have ever read anything on this topic, whether you listen to Walt Heyer, who is somebody that went through a lot with his gender transition. I believe his grandmother transitioned him at the age of 6, at least socially, and then later in life he felt that he was a woman, and then not long after that he decided he was truly a man. And there was just a lot going on through that whole process, and now he counsels people that have gone through this process and shares his story in hopes again of keeping this from happening to kids and teenagers. In the book Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, she talks about it. In the book The End of Gender by Dr. Deborah So, they all have the same data that says that the majority of gender dysphoria used to be something that would happen in young boys, that you could see that they would have these tendencies at a very young age. And then, through a long process through counseling and evaluation, that, later in life, they could be approved to go through these medical transitions in these medical procedures. But it would take a long time to make sure that this is what they wanted to do, because obviously it is not something that you can reverse. And obviously they wanted to make sure that if they were committing to do so, that they understood the long-term medical, psychological, emotional, social implications of these decisions. So that used to be the majority of gender dysphoric cases, was these young boys that had these manifestations at a very young age. But now there has been this absolute explosion of gender dysphoria or transgender identities, and it's been in teenage girls. And that directly correlates with a time in a teenage girl's life when she is so incredibly insecure about everything about her body, about everything about how she looks and how she presents herself, and nobody wants to be accepted more by their peers than teenage girls. So they are so vulnerable to this ideology. They are just looking for a way to be accepted, but also to be noticed and to appear as brave, to appear as independent in some way, but also while doing everything that their friends are doing. And my expertise in that is that once I was a teenage girl and I had a lot of teenage girl friends, and that was just a consistent feeling across the board with all of my friends. And clearly we had our different ideas about who we were, but as a general consensus, everybody just wants to be accepted, and everybody is just really insecure about literally everything. But I'm also so grateful that this thing was not happening at the time when I was a teenager, because all of us had different personalities, all of us had different ways of expressing ourselves, but because, not one of us was 100% gender conforming, who knows how many of us would have ended up on this path at just one little indication that perhaps we didn't want to adhere to every single female gender stereotype. Further into the article, as we're talking about this demand for testosterone for teenage girls, she said, one of my jobs was to do intake for new patients and their families. When I started, there were probably 10 such calls a month. When I left, there were 50, and about 70% of the new patients were girls. Sometimes clusters of girls arrived from the same high school. This concerned me, but I didn't feel I was in the position to sound some kind of alarm back then. There was a team of about 8 of us, and only one other person brought up the kinds of questions I had. Anyone who raised doubts ran the risk of being called a transphobe. This again exposes so many dangers in this movement, that people's activism is taking over their care of children. And as she said, we're doing the opposite of what our oath was, to do no harm, and we are harming children, and we're not even allowed to speak up on it because we're going to be called names, we're going to be targeted, and we're going to be called a transphobe. Like, how is this something that anybody can support, that these kids are coming in and they get a whole group from the same high school and they're not allowed to question it, and they're allowed to just hand out testosterone that has long-term consequences and long-term side effects? They don't want to bring attention to it or discourage these girls from doing it because they're going to be called names and potentially be put at risk themselves. She says the girls who came to us had many comorbidities: depression, anxiety, ADHD, eating disorders, obesity. Many were diagnosed with autism or had autism-like symptoms. A report last year on a British pediatric transgender center found that about 1/3 of the patients referred there were on the autism spectrum. And she's questioning, what is going on. They've got these comorbidities going on. They've got these other issues that are being ignored, and they're being diagnosed as being transgender. And again, like I said, being led down the path to believe that being transgender is going to solve all of these other issues, and none of these other things are being addressed. She says a doctor did recognize these as the false self-diagnosis as a manifestation of social contagion, and even acknowledged that suicide has an element of social contagion. But when I said the clusters of girls streaming into our service looked as if their gender issues might be a manifestation of social contagion, the doctor said gender identity reflected something innate. So they're acknowledging that social contagion exists in other circumstances, but when it comes to gender identity, the only only possible answer is that it's something innate, that's something inside of them. There's no possible way that they could be influenced by their peers to be doing something like this, even though they've got this large group of girls coming in all from the same school, that they're all friends. But no, this is completely an individual decision, and they are just thinking for themselves and just coming in together to all make an individual decision. To begin transitioning, the girls needed a letter of support from a therapist, usually one we recommended, who they had to see only once or twice for the green light. To make it more efficient for the therapist, we offered them a template for how to write a letter in support of transition. The next stop was a single visit to the endocrinologist for a testosterone prescription. That's all it took. When a female takes testosterone, the profound and permanent effects of the hormone can be seen in a matter of months. Voices drop, beards sprout, body fat is redistributed, sexual interest explodes, aggression increases, and mood can be unpredictable. Our patients were told about some side effects, including sterility, but after working at the center, I came to believe that teenagers are simply not capable of fully grasping what it means to make the decision to become infertile while still a minor. And I think that this goes along perfectly with Chloe Cole's story, who is, she's been traveling the country and speaking at different legislative sessions to get gender transition surgeries banned in the state for minors. And she talks about how, she started to transition at the age of 13, and that all of these counselors told her parents that this is what she wanted, and she did end up eventually getting a double mastectomy at the age of 15. And she said at that time, there's no way, I wasn't thinking about whether or not I wanted to be a mom. And she said that it wasn't until she started doing some kind of class assignment on health or anatomy, I don't know what it was, but it talked about the idea of breastfeeding your children, and that's when it hit her, like, how do I know that I don't want to breastfeed my children? How do I know that this is something that I am or am not going to want to do? And I have just completely eliminated that option at the age of 15. And that's something to this day, 3-4 years later, that she is still grappling with, understanding that she is never going to be able to do that. So this lady is saying, like, they're not capable of fully grasping what it means to make the decision to become infertile, to decide at the age of 14, 15, 16 years old that they don't want to bear children, that they don't even want to have that opportunity. Yet these doctors and medical professionals are operating on the idea that they are capable of making this decision. They're ignoring their lack of maturity. They're ignoring all of these other factors that are a concern, that they just came in with a group of friends and they're making a decision that everybody else is making, that they have all of these other comorbidities like depression and anxiety and possibly ADHD or an eating disorder, and giving them this diagnosis that is going to impact them for the rest of their life, and assuring them that this is the answer to their problems and that all of these things are just going to go away, and that they are going to feel just as sure about this decision now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So she goes into a lot of other data and information that she was able to kind of compile from this clinic, from working for this clinic, and all of the side effects of the drugs that they are giving kids and all of their repercussions, and just how some of the smallest characteristics that parents were seeing in their kids, like their daughter being a tomboy, was all they needed to start their kid down this path. Everything that we are saying and all of our concerns are being validated, that this is not something that is based in medicine, that this is based in activism, that this is not something that kids truly understand the impact of, and they are being preyed upon at a time when they cannot understand it. And we need to be talking more about these stories. I'm going to leave the article in the description box so you can read the whole thing, because there's so much more to it. But I wanted to shed light again on this whistleblower who is coming forward and saying everything that you have said is happening to these kids is happening. Your position of being against the transition of kids is not from a place of hate, but because you know that they are being preyed upon, and that these are not decisions that they are making for themselves. So please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below, share it with others. Also, be sure you are subscribed. I would love to have you follow my channel. Hit the notification bell so you can be notified every time I post a video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.